Easy peeper deeps, and welcome to another episode of the Feeling Fine podcast. And I am your host, P Fine, or Pete Fine, if you wish. And first off, I just want to give my apologies for the absence of my show last week due to recording issues and basically a lack of time. I didn't give myself enough time to sort out the recording issues. So I was unable to bring a show for you last week. But however, here I am today, back with another recording of my ramblings and observations. And grateful to have you here. Grateful for everybody that's been tuning in. Don't forget, if you listen to these podcasts, hit the subscribe button. Subscribe and be a part of the ongoing and growing community. And just to give a quick shout out and a mention to my listeners across the globe. On my last check, I noted that there are people that are listening in Paraguay now, New Zealand, Bahamas, Japan, the United States, various places, obviously reaching out to quite a few corners of the globe. So thank you all. I'm truly grateful that you are giving me the time to lending me your ears. Truly grateful. And like I said, if you are listening, if you do listen, don't forget to subscribe, and so that you will be alerted and informed or whatever of when the next podcast is recorded. So today's episode I have called Human Nature. Human nature. It's something that I've heard, is one of those expressions that people say quite often is human nature. Behaviors and things like this and attitudes and so on, it's human nature, it's human nature. But I remember, there was a point where, somebody said this to me. We were in conversation, and I don't remember who it was I was talking to or whatever, but I was in conversation with somebody and we were talking about something specific, but then this person that I was speaking to said, "This is just human nature." And it kind of shut me up for a minute, because it was almost like, well, it was like, for me, there was this question, I suppose, in my head, but it's not my nature. Whatever it was that we were talking about, it was like, this person I was speaking to said it's human nature, but in my head, this thought, it's not my nature. But at the same time, I never said it out loud, because it was a term that was quite new to me, and it was something that I wanted to understand. Now, for years, ever since I was a teenager, I suppose, maybe, a young teen, I would watch people. Watching people was almost like a bit of a hobby. not in a seedy way, not watching people in a seedy way. You know, people have always intrigued me, and I would watch people's expressions, people's mannerisms and actions, and how people would interact and act, kind of thing. And it's something that I suppose for me personally has given me a better understanding of people. And you know, you can generally tell when you watch people. You know, when the more you get to know yourself, the more you get to know and understand yourself, and you know, your own state of mind and so on, and how the effects of your own mind, what these effects have on your body, kind of thing. The more you sort of go into understanding all of this, the more watching people and seeing people, the more you understand about human behavior. So I would watch people all the time. I would sit and watch people. One of the things that I've always done, still do to this day, is I just sit in silence. More so now, to be fair. More so now, but I sit in silence and I just pay attention. And I suppose more in the past it was more like daydreaming. Often it was daydreaming. But now I just pay attention. I just look. And one of the most important things to me over the past few years has been to bring silence and space to my mind. So with this being as important as it has been, it's been important for me to cut out a lot of the noise in my life, which has meant I don't listen to music as much as I used to. It doesn't have that the same kind of dominant force as what it once had. At one point, I would always have music on. At one point, I would very rarely allow silence into my life. There would always be music. There would always be background noise of some description. But now, silence has become more important to me than noise. So at one point I would always have noise in my life. Then I cut out the noise. And it's these kind of things, these kind of actions that I've taken, these steps that I've taken, that have kind of allowed me to see and understand more people more deeply. So when I started to pay attention to the things that my own behaviors, I started to develop, and even if it's not an understanding, it's an appreciation for where people come from. You know, so every single one of us, we are so individually unique, and it's, you know, our uniqueness, it's so much deeper than just our image, than how we look. It's so much deeper than our expressions, our facial expressions and features, and, you know, our body size and shape and all of this kind of stuff. Our individuality goes so much deeper than this. I suppose it's one way of looking at it is like we are all like walking chemical factories. We're all like walking chemical factories, biological and chemical factories. And between each individual, there is different mixtures of chemicals. So this individual has this certain setup of chemicals, or his or her setup is made up of these kind of chemicals. The next individual, they might have the same kind of chemicals, but in different measures, in completely different measures. So 10% of this of one chemical, say in one person, in the other person it might be 15%, and so on and so on. So right down to our structure, obviously we all differ down to our DNA strands and stuff like this. But, and the DNA being the fundamental building block of who we are, kind of thing. But then from that, every aspect of who we are, there is individuality in every single aspect. And it's this individuality in every single aspect that means that even how we behave, our nature, the nature of this body, so the nature of my body is going to be different to somebody else's. So when I was having this conversation with somebody and they said it's human nature, the realization that I came to was, well, actually, when we speak of human nature, nature is going to be different from one person to the next in differing amounts. But there is something that we all share. Something that we all share. There are, which is basically, we are all affected by the nature of the planet in the same way. So as physical beings, we are all affected by the nature and the kind of movements of the planet in the same way, meaning we are all affected by it. We are all affected by the process of the universe, basically. The movements of the universe affects each and every one of us, but in sort of differing amounts and in differing levels. So this, I suppose, is what astrology touches on. So a lot of people speak of astrology and they say, oh, it's a load of rubbish, it's not true, blah, blah, blah. But what astrology does, and I've not said it in this episode yet, everything that I speak of and everything that I say, this is just my observation. It's just how I see life. And my observation, it's unfolding. So it's like the more I communicate in this way and the more I speak, the more it's almost like the more gets revealed to me for me to speak of. So everything that I'm saying, it's not that I'm sharing it for you to believe, just to lend me your ears, just to listen, maybe contemplate it. Maybe you might be able to see exactly where I'm coming from and how I'm seeing this. But please take it on board that it's not anything that I want you to believe, and I stress that. More than anything, it's to open up the avenue of inquiry within yourself. So, astrology. A lot of people look at astrology and say, oh, it's a load of rubbish. It's people basing their lives on all this crap, blah, blah, blah. But astrology, in truth, it's like you look at this planet and what happens to the planet when we have a full moon or a new moon, for example. When we go through the lunar cycles, basically. And everything, or rather, the moon has an effect on all the water on this planet. It creates movement. The presence of the moon creates movement in the waters. And the human body is it 70% or something like that? Water? Something like this. So if the moon can have such a huge impact on the waters of the world, then ultimately it's also going to have an impact on the physical body, on our physical body, being that it is the largest percentage of our body is water. So it's going to have an effect on our whole sort of physiological system. And the problem is, or where this can be a problem, is if we don't realize this, without realizing this, then for some people, this movement and this effect is going to be quite troublesome. It's going to be quite problematic. Some people are going to struggle at certain times of the month, and so on and so forth. And I did hear. I follow Sadhguru. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Sadhguru. I follow Sadhguru on social media, and he said something about the word lunatic actually comes from. It's not something that I've looked into, but it actually comes from. It's derived from the fact that some people basically lose the plot on a full moon. So it's like on the lunar, meaning the moon, they develop a tic, which I've never heard it before, but it sounds plausible. It sounds like there might be some truth in this. Words are amazing. Words fascinate me. But anyway, this is what happens. So we have the moon cycle. The moon has such a huge impact on the planet, on the waters of the planet. The human body is predominantly water. So it stands to reason then that the presence of the moon is going to have an impact on our physiology in varying degrees, because then we also have, we're all born at certain times and dates throughout the year, which obviously when you look at the astrology, you have different star signs and so on. You know, I was born under the star sign of Aquarius. And I did read a few years ago that Aquarians are the most common sign to be found in a mental asylum. But the flip side of it is also the most common sign to be a genius. And my whole life I've been walking that fine line. I think, unfortunately for everybody else, my genius only reveals itself when I'm on my own. But anyway, so we're all born at different times of the year and so on. So now let's look at that aspect and the fact that different times of the year we have different cycles, different phases. We have the seasons and so on, although seasons aren't as cut and dried as they used to be. You know, they seem to be a little bit more kind of unpredictable, let's say. You know, at one point we could actually kind of predict spring, summer, autumn, or fall and winter. But now it tends to be a little bit more varied. But despite this, we still have different phases of the year, which obviously have different sort of climates, different temperatures, different weather conditions, and so on. So obviously there's a movement that's happening there as well. So this also plays a part in our own individual nature. So my point being that when we speak of human nature, it isn't really something that we can lock down in such a way. You know, it's like education. Our whole education system tries to lock every single human being down into a certain way of thinking, which is completely alien to who we truly are. So, and this is how I look at human nature. Is human nature is really actually quite varied. It's quite varied. So one of the things, you know, speaking about myself now, is one of these aspects of human behavior, I suppose. Well, would I call it behavior or nature? I suppose my nature is to be. I'm introverted. My sort of usual kind of approach to life is introverted. So being on my own, being in my own space, being kind of lost in thought has always been a prominent thing in my life. I don't know if you heard my stomach rumbling, but it's cool. I don't listen all the time now. If my stomach rumbles, it's not a sign that I need to eat something. I kind of look at it as being my body correcting itself, you know, as opposed to this idea that we have to start stuffing our faces because our stomachs are making noise. It's a good time for our bodies to correct themselves. So it's like when you're ill and you might have some kind of virus or whatever, and you lose your appetite. Basically, your body shuts down so that it can use the energy that would normally be used to digest food. It can use that to you know, to support the healing process. So in my wellness, I look at my stomach being empty and not having food to digest as an opportunity for my body to kind of correct everything, to correct my system. So I try not nowadays to rush for something to eat. But anyway, I've just wandered off topic. Introvert. So my nature is kind of more introverted. Well, perhaps I leaned toward. I read somewhere that you have extroverts who tend to be more outgoing and, you know, prefer the public spaces and be around people. Introverts is completely the opposite. But then you have, I think it was ambiverts or something, which basically is somewhere in the middle. And I would probably say I lean more towards introvertedness with a touch of extrovertedness, which is to say that sometimes I want to be out and about, I want to be in a crowd, but my overall preference is to be on my own, in my own space, or with very few people. And, you know, in this respect, it's like, as an introvert, most introverts are basically generally misunderstood. And, you know, it's one of these things that most or a lot of artists, whether it's, you know, any form of art, tend to be introverts. A lot of artists tend to be introverts. And I notice one of the things that, in today's world of social media, and it's, we are at a point where, because we have the ability to do so with the internet and so on, it's so much easier to do things for yourself, which means as an artist, this can be a great thing, because it means you can publicize and publish your own material and so on and so forth. You can own your own material. But then, from an introvert standpoint, this it kind of opens up more issues and more complications, because now all of a sudden you have to not only learn to learn how to market and publish and sell your art, but you have to approach people, which is an introvert. From an introvert standpoint, that's a challenge. It's a challenge. And, when, in fact, many of you, or some of you listening to this might remember, or have been following me since I used to MC in the rave scene. And most of my work as an artist came about back in the day. In the mid-90s, in the mid to late 90s, most of my work came about from sending out demo tapes. So the beauty of being an introvert and having a demo tape, the demo tape basically spoke for me. It was like, this is what I can do. And back then, it was so much easier, because promoters would generally listen to a lot of the demo tapes. But then obviously I worked closely with a promoter, and I could see behind the scenes that it obviously got to the point where there was that many people wanting to perform as artists that promoters would generally be bogged down with demo tape after demo tape from DJs, MCs, and so on. And it just became like a phenomenon that was just hard to stay on top of. But I got most of my work through sending out my demos, and promoters would listen and they'd hear the demo, and then they might come to a club where I was working, or they might appear and see and hear me for themselves. But then when promoters stopped listening to demos, for me personally, it was more of a challenge to be heard. But then, because from this standpoint now, it means that I have to approach people in a completely different way. And this was what I found quite, to be quite difficult. And this is the thing as well, is, you can sort of feel people's energies. And most people might not realize this, but you can feel people's energies. You can feel people's energies, and you can feel like there are some people that you can be more open and relaxed and communicative with than others. This isn't a fault on anybody's part. It's just the way it is. You might say that this is the nature of each individual. Each individual has this kind of aura, if you like, this energy field that that kind of speaks to some people in a way more than others, and so on. So as an artist, my challenge was being introverted, trying to approach people in this way, in a way that they would give me the time to see what I was capable of and what I could do. And it became too much of a challenge for me that I just couldn't do it in the end. I couldn't do it. And it's a shame that in this respect, it ends up being like this, but it's an inevitable consequence. It's an inevitable consequence. Nothing new is ever going to be or rather, it doesn't take long before anything new becomes saturated. And if at the point when it becomes saturated, if you haven't made enough noise, kind of thing, to be heard, then you are either not going to be heard or you will struggle to be heard. So in the world that we live in today, when you look online at all these different online businesses and so on and so forth, one of these things that they speak of is niches, and having a niche that you can focus on, which basically means narrowing down the field and making as much noise in that narrower field. So in this respect, looking at the whole MC path that I followed, that would be like me narrowing down the field as an artist and making as much noise in that field, which I suppose herein lies another problem for me, was that I always tried to do so much for everybody as opposed to trying to narrow down the field. So this effectively is my nature. And, you know, for somebody else that is kind of naturally extrovert, or somebody else that is naturally ambivert, they are going to have a completely different way of approaching life. For somebody that was born at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, or sort of the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, towards the end of the year or whatever, again, it's going to have an effect on the way that we present ourselves and our not just the way that we present ourselves, but on our outlook. And everything about us is affected in this way. And it's affected by the nature of the universe, the movement. So nature basically is like movement. Nature is movement. Nature is the whole process. So the whole process and the movement of the universe is reflected in our individuality, and our individuality at the time that we were born, the time that we became a part of this planet, of this universe, basically. And this, I see this as being something important to understand, because we generally have this attitude that, and you know, it's something that we derive, that has been derived from our education and the education process. We generally have this attitude that we look at people in a way as if to say, it's almost like we look at people as if to say that we've got our lives sussed out and other people haven't. I think there's a word that's quite, there's often, I see it often in the press and in the media, and which is surprising really, because I don't really read newspapers as such. I'm not a massive newspaper reader. I don't watch the news as such. I haven't watched the news on TV or anything for a very long time, probably even years. I've listened to it on occasion on the radio, and newspapers, sometimes I'll grab a newspaper and read the headlines or front page or whatever. But there's a word that is obviously quite prominent, and it must be if I hardly read the news or whatever, and I know this word, snowflake. Snowflake. And in fact, I did see a brief headline on one of the tabloids, Piers Morgan, and he's talking about something. That was it. The Brit Awards, I think for next year, have dropped the best male and best female artist categories from the award ceremony in light of obviously to make it more gender neutral, as they call it. I think that's the word, gender neutral or something. And Piers Morgan gave his, stuck in his two penneth to, and I know that snowflake is one of his kind of favorite words amongst woke. So he said something on this headline, something, he's basically criticizing what I think his term was, the woke community or something like this. And you know, I look at life as being, we have to pay attention. We have to look at what's happening. And it's easy to look at the way things are. It's easy to look at what people are doing and how people are communicating and how people are expressing themselves. And it's easy to look at this and have an opinion on it, as if to say, you have no reason to speak or to think like this or to act like this. You know, as if to say that people are becoming, which is what snowflake generally means, people are becoming too sensitive. And you know, where this whole idea of being woke comes into things is, it's like people are looking at the woke people, I suppose, as, I think, I might be wrong here, but they might be regarded as being the millennials or something like this, the woke community. And it's just people that are basically starting to choose how they want to see life and choose how they want to be referred to. And it's easy to, you know, generally speaking, people are only going to have a problem with this because it goes against their own beliefs, their own core beliefs. It goes against them. And it means that when somebody is going to approach you and say, I don't want you to call me a man or a woman or male or female or whatever, it means that in your mind, your reality is being challenged. And that's the only problem. It's not the fact that this person doesn't want to be seen as the image that you have in your mind. It's the fact that you have to look at this situation now. Or more importantly, you have to look at the image in your mind and you have to question that. And this is what's happening now. What's happening now is more people are starting to actually realize, and it is a realization, that how we describe ourselves is not how we have chosen to describe ourselves, but it's how we have been told we must describe ourselves. And that's a big thing. So, you know, it's easy to get caught up in all of this, you know, snowflake and woke nonsense. It's easy to start typecasting and labeling people for how they are starting to see life. But the deeper reality is that the reason why people are starting to see life in this way, the reason why people speak out in the first place, is because if people are speaking out against something, it's because there is some kind of deep-rooted pain that's coming to the surface that needs to be transmuted. It needs to be understood. It needs to be accepted. It needs to be embraced. And we have a choice. We are either going to accept it. We are either going to accept it with the understanding that this is somebody else's reality, or we are going to resist it. And resistance is the one thing that humanity has been doing for such a long time. Human beings have been resisting other people's reality forever. And it's been the source and cause of all this turmoil, all this hate and all these wars and so on, have just been because one human being has resisted another human being's reality. So this nature, Nature is the movement. The movement of the universe is nature. And the way I see it, human nature is not separate from the universe, the nature of the planet. There's no separation between the two. We have the ability, however, we have the ability to kind of transcend the human nature. We have the ability to transcend it in the same way that one can look out of the window and see it's raining, and at one point would have looked at the rain as being a problem, now can look at the rain as being a necessity. It's a necessary process that this planet has to go through. In the same way, one can look at one's own nature and from this same level of understanding, it's a necessary process. What matters is, are we going to allow this process, the nature of the human, are we going to allow the nature of the human to be the dominant force in humanity? You know, I suppose what makes being human miraculous is the fact that we have the ability to choose how we want to be. So you compare being human to being an animal. Let's look at a cat. A cat isn't going to sit there and say, do you know what? Today, I'm going to eat with a knife and fork. Fed up of sticking my nose in the dish, I'm going to eat with a knife and fork. And I'm going to wipe my arse with toilet paper. You know, no animal, maybe monkeys or whatever might have the ability to mimic human behavior in this way, but no animal, no other species on this planet, as to my knowledge, has the ability to make a choice in how it is going to act, how it is going to be. Human beings have the choice. We have the choice. Now, this the human nature, where human nature becomes the problem, or becomes kind of like problematic, is the fact that we have the choice. It's the fact that we have the choice that kind of creates the problem. If human beings didn't have the conscious awareness to be able to make conscious choices, if we were just like any other animal, then human beings wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't have a problem because we would just be acting like animals. But the problem is, we act like animals even though we have the conscious awareness to transcend the animalistic behavior. So, and this in truth is what the problem is. You know, we progress on this planet as human beings. We progress on this planet with all these inventions, with all these ideas, and so many things that man has contributed to this planet since man has walked on this planet, because we have the conscious awareness to be creative in this way. But at the same time as advancing in this way, in a materialistic way, psychologically, we still remain quite animalistic. quite animalistic, quite territorial, and so on and so forth. So we have the conscious awareness to be creative, but we have the animal instinct that kind of holds us back, that keeps us in this mindset of desiring so many things and wanting to hold on to so many things in a kind of animalistic way, kind of like squirrels storing stuff for the winter or for the hibernation stuff. The human mind works in this very primitive way, when in fact we have evolved so much consciously that we don't need to act in the same way anymore, because we are effectively conscious beings. So that's how I view human nature. It's something that is in line with the planet, with the movements of the planet, and at the same time it has varying degrees of difference from one individual to the next. But then, besides all of that, we are consciously aware, and we are becoming more and more consciously aware of who we are at a deeper level than just the physical human aspect of what is seen. You know, the consciousness of humanity is beginning to rise. It's being elevated. And, you know, to me, this is a necessity. It's a necessity to bring about this change, the conscious evolution. Because what we see in the world today is, we see a lot of, and it's been going on, and, you know, for years, for thousands of years, people are trying to change the planet. People want things to be different on the planet. And, you know, I see that all the climate change and all of this kind of stuff, it's all, I understand it all. It's all, it's necessary that human beings start to change the way that we behave. Because with the way that we behave now, it doesn't lead towards sustaining the planet for our survival. All this stuff about killing the planet and stuff, I don't go for that idea. But I understand that if we don't change the way we act, then we effectively are turning the planet into something that doesn't support us and our survival. But the biggest problem is, in this respect, is people are trying to change the outside world, when in reality we have to focus on our inner world. We have to understand what it truly means to be conscious, and what it truly means to be consciously aware, and how this conscious awareness can shine a light over the human behavior, the human nature, with the kind of authority and the power to steer it in a much more clear and precise way that supports human beings as a whole. But anyway, that's it for this week's podcast. Don't forget to tune in for Fine on Friday. And thank you all for listening. And I look forward to speaking to you again on the next Feeling Fine podcast. Until then, have a blessed week, have a blessed weekend. Peace.